Hello dear friends, glad to see you on my channel again. Since the release of Poppy Playtime Chapter 3, it's been 2 months already. During this time we have accumulated a whole bunch of theories. We even had time to discuss with you about the 4th chapter. So in today's video, I decided to discuss with you absolutely everything about our favorite game. Let's go. The company of funny animals that everyone knows as Smiling Critters has won the hearts of just about everyone who has anything to do with Poppy Playtime games. Fans create a lot of fan arts, argue among each other who is the coolest and best of them all, put forward various theories about them. However, most of them agree that we shouldn't expect them in the 4th chapter because they all died at the hands of the main antagonist, Prototype. But don't be disappointed, because I have great news for you. In the new 4th chapter, we will see a brand new Smiling Critters cast, and I think you will love it as much as the previous one. So let's get to the announcement of the new Smiling Critters lineup. The first one I would like to pay attention to is Cutie Susie. She is a very friendly panda who at first glance uses philosophical phrases, telling us that the world is not only black and white. She also shows her kindness and says that she would be glad to show us the way, but after that her speech is interrupted by some interference, and what she wanted to tell us next remains a mystery to us. Perhaps she wanted to warn us of the approaching danger, or maybe it was the other way around and she wanted to trap us. What do you think Cutie Susie was trying to tell us? The next character we will see in the new Smiling Critters lineup is Sweet Sheep. This is one of the most interesting characters in my opinion. So what is Sweet Sheep? She is a sheep that is quite different from the rest of the characters, because she doesn't talk to us in a nice way. She talks tough and straightforward. From her cardboard we learn that she was pre-Catnap, but what could that mean? Maybe she was Prototype's assistant before Catnap, or maybe Sweet Sheep was a supervisor at Playcare before Catnap and also had some kind of superpower that the kids liked a lot. She also tells us that the new Smiling Critters are too bright and then asks us to turn off the lights, telling us that you can see a lot more detail in the dark. What's your impression of this character? The next member of the new Smiling Critters lineup is Little Skittle. This is a squirrel who is very lonely. From her cardboard we learn that someone is always following her, but when she tries to find them, they immediately disappear. Further into the conversation, she has a tantrum. She can't understand why she is alone, and she tells us that she is about to start eating herself. At the end of the conversation, she says she hates this place and herself. Another prospective member of the new Smiling Critters is Moody Moose, a moose who seems to be very shy. We learn from his cardboard that he can't even remember his name when asked. We also learn that he seems to be new here. He doesn't even know what this place is. He also tells us that he is homeless and asks for a bed. His speech, like all the others, is cut short by screams. The next new member of Smiling Critters that we can also expect to see in the 4th chapter is Crocky Rocky, who, as we can see from his cardboard, is a green dinosaur who offers us to be cool. Also from him we learn that he and Kickin' Chicken are brothers, and they were the coolest kids. Also he tells us about the situation with Bobby Bearhug, how they locked him in the closet. Later his speech is also cut short by a horrible scream. The next character is Riddle Roo, who appears to be a kangaroo. From her cardboard we learn that she is a collector of various things. She then decides to show us something from her collection, and it turns out to be human fingers. Her conversation, like all the previous characters, ends with a scream. I have one more character. This is Griffy Gingers. From his cardboard we learn that he is an avid joker. He once pranked Miss Delight by putting a sharp pin on her chair. Then he offers us to help him with his best prank, namely to hang a bucket of water over Miss Delight's office door so that when she opened the door the water would pour over her head. From the conversation we also learn that he got into Miss Delight's office and that she was doing something with her sisters. As you can guess, his conversation also ended with her screaming. Another one I'd like to name is Tiggy Tiger. When we meet his cardboard, he offers us to be friends and spend time together. Then he asks where his friends from Smiling Critters are. Then his mood changes abruptly, and Tiggy Tiger tells us that he hates them for leaving him and that his revenge will be harsh. And at the end of his speech we hear terrible screams. The next newcomer to Smiling Critters is Snidey Spidey. He is, as you might have guessed, a spider. From his cardboard we learn that he likes to scare people. He tells us that when he sees scared faces it makes his blood boil. His speech, like the previous newcomers, also ends with a scream. Another newcomer is Bully Bolito, who immediately brags to us about his strength. He tells us to exercise to become as strong as him. In his conversation he mentions Crafty Corn and tells us about his affection for her. His conversation also ends with shouting. And now I suggest we get to the equally interesting part, which is that I offer you my theories about the new Smiling Critters lineup. First of all, I would like to present not even a theory but my expectation. Namely that we will most likely see a new cartoon about them, and in it, we will see not only a new cast but also the one we were introduced to in the 3rd chapter. because as we have already learned from their cardboards, they all know each other. Some of them are even related to each other, in case you forgot Crocky Rocky mentioned that his brother is Kickin' Chicken. My first theory is that the new cast of Smiling Critters in the 4th chapter will already be the main characters. I think they will be in some way like Catnap the servants of Prototype. They will do his bidding and keep the whole Playcare territory in fear, especially those who won't obey their god. Hence, we are likely to see new locations, because it would be strange if the locations remain the same and there will be so many new characters. I have one more theory, and it is that after the Hour of Joy, Prototype left alive only Catnap and chained Dog Day to the cage, and all the other Smiling Critters, both new and familiar to us, he killed and left only their mini versions. My next theory is not about all Smiling Critters, but about two brothers, namely Kickin' Chicken and Crocky Rocky, and it is that they escaped after the Hour of Joy and are hiding somewhere in Playcare territory or not far beyond it, and maybe in the new chapter we will see their reunion. After all, as we know from Kickin' Chicken's cardboard, he wanted to escape very badly, and I think he wouldn't have left his brother behind in this nightmare, and would have brought him with him. And that's not all. The next theory is that the Smiling Critters that we haven't seen in the game will appear in the game to avenge Prototype for his old friends. They will have a fight, but they will lose it. Thus, Prototype will become even stronger and closer to the fulfillment of his plan, which gives us hope that we will see not only his arm, but his whole body at the end of the 4th chapter. But do not forget that maybe they will not show all of them, as it was Poppy Playtime Chapter 3, but for example, they will leave only one of them alive, and he will tell us what happened to the others. So for example, I see Snidey Spidey as the survivor. Even when listening to his cardboard, we can hear his cruelty, because he tells us that his blood boils when he sees the frightened faces of people, so he could easily become one of the main antagonists in the 4th chapter and help Prototype in the execution of his plan. I think a lot of you enjoyed Crafty Corn. For truly, I can't find a single flaw in her. She was kind, sweet, and also really liked to draw. But you're going to say, what does Crafty Corn have to do with the new Smiling Critters? Actually, one of the monsters in the new cast has a thing for our unicorn, and I'm talking about the rather formidable Bully Bolito, and it is their story together that can be told in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. As we progress through the game, we'll make our way to a new location that has been destroyed by someone. I'll tell you later, of course, who the bully was who did it. So after we find ourselves in a new location, that after a few minutes we will hear the screams of help. As soon as we get closer, we will immediately see a familiar silhouette in the window, and it will be Crafty Corn, who will be desperately trying to get someone out of the rubble. When Crafty Corn sees us, she will ask for our help. Seeing that our unicorn really sincerely asks for help and not trying to trap us, we will immediately try to help her. And after we remove some debris, a huge horn will appear in front of our eyes and red wool around it. This is how we will meet Bully Bolito. After that, between us and these two Smiling Critters will begin a dialogue from which we will gradually learn who is the Prototype and for what purpose he tried to subjugate all the Smiling Critters. We also learn more information about Catnap and why he became one of the few who trusted the Prototype. And by the way, remember I promised to tell you about the one who destroyed the location where we found Bully Bolito. Well, it was Catnap, and he only did it to kill our bull. And since Smiling Critters have been living on Playtime Cavern territory for a long time, they obviously know this area much better than we do, and it is Crafty Corn and Bully Bolito who will be our companions throughout the game. And this will last until we meet the Prototype. And during the battle with him, our brave Smiling Critters will be on our defense and unfortunately will be killed by the Prototype or by one of his new assistants. And now I want to present you my favorite theory. Remember in the beginning of the video I mentioned such a character as Sweet Sheep, which according to him, was before Catnap. So I think that in the new part she will be Prototype's assistant. She as well as Catnap will have some kind of superpower. I hope that this ability will be much cooler than the already familiar cat. I also expect that we will be shown a VHS tape about Sweet Sheep in which we will be told why she was replaced by Catnap. I assume that there was some incident that caused this replacement. But of course there is a possibility that the developers will add new Smiling Critters gradually, not all at once, while revealing their stories in more detail. But I have a sad theory, and it is that we will not see them as characters. Maybe we will be shown their cardboards in Chapter 4 to tell us that they are there, but that's it. I think many of you already know all about the characters of the 3rd chapter, but what new bosses or regular characters will appear in Chapter 4 of our favorite game? Some of them we have already seen in the 3rd chapter, and some of them will be those we have been waiting for a long time, but for some reason have been hidden from us for a long time. Let's start with the character we already know, Ollie. I'm sure his role in the Poppy Playtime universe is not finished yet, because we still don't know what he looks like and who he is. Maybe he's the famous Brawn, or maybe he's just one of the prototype's assistants. To be honest, I would really like to see the real face of this character and finally tell us what his plans are. After all, judging by the conversation with Poppy, it's easy to understand that she knows him, which means that in the new chapter, we'll most likely be introduced to Ollie as Poppy's assistant at Playtime Corporation. We all remember how the third chapter ended, and it would be logical for the fourth chapter to start from the same place. And I think that after we go upstairs again, we will see the wounded body of Kissy Missy and the silhouette of the monster that did this to her. But the reason why this monster didn't manage to kill Kissy completely is our mysterious guy Ollie, who will appear at the most important moment. Now let's talk about those characters who have not yet appeared in any way in the Poppy Playtime universe. And the first one I would like to tell you about is a very interesting character that you all have already seen in Project Playtime, but he has never been in the Poppy series. We're talking about Boxy Boo, of course. Boxy Boo was one of the characters we see on the very ominous tape, The Hour of Joy. Boxy Boo is one of the main monsters whose death we haven't seen yet. Yes, in previous versions of the game, we have seen the death of such characters as Huggy Waggy, Mommy Longlegs, and of course the main character of the third part of Poppy Playtime Catnap. Well, and we shouldn't forget about his former friends from Smiling Critters who died at his hands. So for now, from the most known characters we have Boxy Boo, so we can expect his appearance with high probability. My opinion about Boxy Boo is that I would be happy to see him in the new version of the game, if only the developers could introduce him into the story and make his existence in the game as interesting as possible. The next character that many people are expecting is Prototype. You will say to me, well, we have seen him in previous versions of the game. In the first chapter, he was in the form of a reference on the tape. In the second part of the game, he dragged away the remains of Mommy Longlegs. Well, and in the third part, he was the main villain who was obeyed by Catnap and forced everyone else to do the same. Maybe in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4, we will see him in full form and we will see what the sacrifices of all the monsters led to. Of course, there is a theory that Prototype is actually kind and wanted to free all the monsters from the abuse of the Poppy Factory workers, but then how can we explain the murder of his main subordinate by Catnap? I think that many of you like the story of Smiling Critters, and it's not fair that from all these monsters we were shown only Dog Day and Catnap. Let's talk about the ones that have a 99% chance of appearing in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. And the first of the Smiling Critters will be Hoppy Hopscotch, of course. If you listen to her card, you know that she didn't die or show any signs of fear or being killed. She just wanted to play with us, but we still hear a scream at the end. I think our Hoppy Hopscotch just didn't get to the right height during the game and didn't land well when she fell, which means she's just a little injured and not much more. What prevents her from waiting for her wounds to heal a bit and appearing before us in Chapter 4? I think Hoppy Hopscotch is unlikely to be the main boss of the new chapter, just one of the ones we have to defeat in order to find the main villain of Chapter 4. Like Hoppy Hopscotch, there are several Smiling Critters that are bound to appear in the new chapter. And this is probably the least obvious option, but the new boss of Chapter 4 will be Crafty Corn. I think Mob Entertainment is considering that option. And objectively speaking, except for the fact that Crafty Corn liked to draw, we don't know anything else about her. Despite the fact that Picky Piggy almost directly said in one of her messages that she ate our unicorn, I'm sure it was just a little hint from the developers that one of these characters might end up in the new chapter of Poppy Playtime. Also, Crafty Corn is the last cardboard we get to listen to, and that also struck me as very odd. Maybe Crafty Corn will be the first boss we meet in Chapter 4. And before we get to the more interesting options, I'd like to tell you about one of the Smiling Critters that I told you about in the video, and of course, it's Picky Piggy. This piggy makes many of us marvel at how strong her hunger is, that she is willing to eat even her friends to get enough. And from that, we realize how bloodthirsty this character is. And I don't think the mob would want to lose such a specimen. Another very important nuance is that almost all of the Smiling Critters want nothing to do with the prototype's plans, except for two. One of them is already familiar to us, Catnap, and the second such character is our ever-hungry Picky Piggy. And it is Picky Piggy who can become a replacement for Catnap in the fourth chapter. She won't be as valuable as Catnap, but she will have a very strong influence on the new chapter. I think Picky Piggy will be with us for half of the game, and we will have to fight her about 60% of the time. And considering how bloodthirsty she is, I think Picky Piggy will be one of the hardest bosses in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. From what we have heard, it is easy to understand that Bobby is a very kind and sweet character who is not happy with what is happening to her and her friends at Playtime Co. But what if, after a very successful experience with Catnap, who is willing to serve the prototype faithfully, the decision was made to continue their experiments with the rest of the Smiling Critters? I think we will see Bobby Bear Hug somewhere in the middle of the new chapter, And at first, she will be presented as a positive character who will try to help us through the transition, but at the most crucial moment when we need her help, she will show her true face and betray us, and maybe even try to eat us. I am more than sure that we will be forced to return to Playcare and the house where so many strange things are waiting for us. And unfortunately, we will have to kill the cutest of the smiling critters, our bear Bobby Bear Hug. Whether her behavior will change because of the prototype that only wants to hurt us, or whether someone else will be the cause of her anger, we will find out in a year's time in the new chapter of Poppy Playtime. Now it's time to talk about one of the most anticipated characters we haven't seen yet, and I'm talking about the very cute dinosaur Brawn. Many people were sure that Brawn would appear in Chapter 3, because in the first teaser trailer after the severed body of Mommy Longlegs, we were shown Brawn's head. But as we already know, the main antagonist of Chapter 3 is not Brawn at all, and I'm sure Brawn is the most desirable character we've seen so far. And it's probably time to tell us more about this dinosaur, especially since his life story in Playtime Co. is very fascinating and it would be interesting to know how it will affect Brawn in the future. In case you don't know, Thomas Clark, a 59-year-old full-time employee of Playtime Co., was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. After receiving the diagnosis, he willingly volunteered to be part of the Bigger Bodies experiment. Scientists placed his organs, eyes, and brain inside a Brawn toy in what became known as the 1199 experiment. He was severely disoriented and did not know where he was or what had happened to him. When 1199 was introduced to the other experiments, they immediately realized that he was not an orphan forced to be an experimenter. As a result, Boxy Boo almost completely ate his vocal cords and thyroid gland before the research team intervened to stop the experiments from killing Brawn. It took 12 hours of surgery to stabilize Brawn's condition. He was then placed in solitary confinement to protect him from further experiments. And now let's talk about less obvious options, namely that our new hero will be Catnap. Despite everything, we cannot exclude the possibility that we will be introduced to the already deceased Catnap. Of course, he will not be one of the main villains as it was in the third chapter, but as a secondary character, he is ideal. We all know that the prototype killed Catnap, but this amazingly horrible cat is so well liked that I think it is necessary to make him a reference in the new chapter. But how will that happen? I'm sure that Chapter 4 will reveal the biggest secret of the Playtime Corporation, and we'll finally find out who the prototype is. But it will be at the end. But before that, we will fight with some bosses in the window or somewhere else we will see Catnap, who will help us like in the third chapter. But I think everyone understands that this help will not be for the sake of our salvation, but just so that we can finally meet the prototype. That would be very interesting. I have already mentioned the long-legged family several times. Of all of them, we have seen only Mommy Longlegs. But the rest of the family members in the previous parts of the game we did not have a chance to see. Even though we know that the prototype took Mommy Longlegs' body at the end of Poppy Playtime Chapter 2, I'm sure he's doing it for a reason. Maybe his main goal in life is to resurrect all these monsters or reincarnate them into more powerful characters. And if that's the case, I'm sure that Mommy Longlegs will appear as a supporting character in the new chapter. Well, Mommy Longlegs isn't the only member of her family. Daddy Longlegs may also appear in the new chapter. And considering the fact that we haven't seen him yet, I'm sure his appearance is almost certain. But as what kind of character? Whether he'll be positive or negative is hard to say. On the one hand, his wife died because of us, but there is also a prototype who took her body, and it is unknown what he will do with it. However, I am more sure that Daddy Longlegs will be on the side of the prototype, because as we know, the prototype is very good at subduing monsters, and it is very easy to make a grief-stricken Daddy Longlegs think that we killed his beloved wife. I think if he does show up, we'll see him towards the end of the fourth chapter, maybe even before we meet the prototype himself. There is another very interesting character that we know as one of the members of Smiling Critters, and we're talking about Kickin' Chicken. I'm interested in him because he's the only character who's directly talked about trying to get out of this place. I don't think he's going to be introduced as the boss, but as a secondary character telling us his story. I'd love to see him. The next character didn't appear anywhere. He's really cut. He was cut before he could even be added. This character is Psydog. He was going to be added. At first he was in the form of a robot dog, but then apparently the developers thought they already had one robot and a second one wouldn't fit into the game, so they decided to cut him out. Another rumor is that Psydog is the prototype for Love Dog. We couldn't find this dog even in the warehouse with rejected toys. Maybe it was hidden somewhere in the textures or on some pictures or tapes, but we couldn't find it. However, some fans managed to find a Love Dog model, so I assume that Love Dog and Psydog are the same character. Just the developers decided to revise the character. There is another character that will most likely appear in the fourth part of our favorite game, and that is Bubba Bubbaphant. He first appeared as a minor character in the lineup of Smiling Animals. Bubba Fant, like Bobby Bearhug, was part of the 3rd chapter, but we still haven't seen him as a full-fledged monster. But in my opinion, he deserves the most attention from the developers. Our elephant is the driving force of the animals. He is very attentive and always ready to support his friends and guide them on the right path. But the very experiments that have been done on him may be the cause of his madness. And maybe just like Bobby Bearhug, he seems like a nice character at first, but then he betrays us. To be honest, I would love to see every single character of Smiling Critters revealed one by one, because they are all unique in their own way. And I think everyone is already looking forward to the leak of new hands that will appear in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. I have some options for what we might be seeing very soon. And let's talk about the red slingshot hand. I think you all realize that the main mechanism is based on the principle of a catapult or slingshot. And just like the gun hand, this hand has a certain number of charges, but what it can inflict is green paint from the balls. But it seems to me that it's some kind of acid that acts on living flesh. Now let's talk about the others. And of course I'm talking about the dash hand. Let's go back to the moments when we need to use the power of our hand to climb up. However, this action is only realized in the vertical plane, which has always seemed strange to me. I'm talking about why the authors still haven't done something similar so that we can move horizontally in the same way. And that's exactly what dash hand will be able to do. I'm sure that such an ingenious solution can help us a lot in speeding up the game, and it is also important to realize that with the help of dash hand, we will be able to move absolutely anywhere. But there is one very important exception. Dash hand will be safe for us only when we see this picture of a red hand with a grabber. And if we just touch a random wall and try to move thanks to dash hand, of course we will do it, but the consequences will be very sad for us. My personal opinion is that the next hand is the craziest, but also the most interesting concept, and we will talk about the do hand. It doesn't have any super features like the fire hand, but its main feature is to split it into several mini hands. And this is much more interesting, because now we will be able to use 3 hands at the same time. And agree that sometimes during the passage of Poppy Playtime Chapter 3, it was just vital for us to save precious time. Imagine that now we will be able to connect to several transmitters at the same time, which will make our progress through Chapter 4 much easier and more interesting. However, it is important to realize that do hand, like all hands, has its drawbacks. And in the case of the do hand, it will be useless to us when moving or in situations where we need to turn on or pull something. I think many of you know that thanks to the purple hand, we can jump much higher than the main character can in a normal situation. However, it is not always possible to find the purple marker that makes all this possible, and just to exclude such unfortunate situations and can be introduced winged hand. This hand gives us the ability to jump 2 times higher than it happens during normal play. But what if in addition to that we have a marker on the ground, thanks to which, when using the winged hand, we can lift so high that even the highest play care point will be an easy task for us. Or I have another suggestion. Maybe the winged hand will have another dizzying feature in addition to all of the above, and I'm talking about flying. Yes, you are right. Flying around the map. Without any mods and just during the normal passage of a new chapter. But there is a catch. We can only use flying once during the whole game, and as soon as the time we can fly is over, the winged hand just disappears and we can never use it again. And in order to recharge it for flight, we will have to find a secret box with a special device, and it will not be as easy as many might think. If I'm right, the winged hand will probably be the most coveted target for many Poppy Playtime players. We have just discussed the winged hand that can help us jump, and what if they add a hand that allows us to run much faster than the player himself? Even if we use acceleration, it cannot always help us to escape from the monster, but if we use the speed hand, such a task becomes much easier to implement. The mechanism of this hand is very simple. We just have to put it on, and that's it. Thanks to speed hand, we will be able to move around in places 3 or even 4 times faster than now, even using acceleration. But again, speed hand has its drawbacks. Of course, this hand will not disappear and we will be able to use it from the moment we find it until the end of the game, but at the same time, its charge will be limited. I think we will be able to use Mega Acceleration for 15-20 seconds, and then we will have to wait about a minute or maybe 2 minutes for the speed hand to become active again. And now I want to introduce you to the strongest hand of all the hands that have been in the video and the ones I haven't told you about yet. Meet the strike hand. It may be similar in strength to the power hand, but if the power hand can be used mainly to open and close iron doors, then the strike hand is what we have been missing for a long time. But first, we need to clarify that in order to use this hand, we need to use the charging station where we get our wall-piercing charges. I believe the maximum number of charges will be 5. And after charging our strike hand, we can easily break through any wall and move on. The strike hand can also be used against bosses, and since we already know that this hand will be the most powerful of all, it is likely that bosses like Miss Delight will be easy prey for us. But it is important to realize that even though the strike hand is very powerful, it still has its own durability and it will break after a certain amount of breaking walls. I think the maximum limit of the strike hand will be about 25 uses, after which we can lose it forever. And the last hand for today will be the healing hand, which will be the key to a small change in the mechanics of Poppy Playtime. We all know that we can't just get wounded and die after a failure or too close encounter with a boss. What if in the new chapter we can still get wounded and only after 2-3 wounds we finally die? And because of this innovation and will appear healing hand, which just like Harpoon hand will consist of 2 parts. Only in the case of the healing hand, it will be the hand itself and the heart that will heal us. And to find this hand, we will first have to find the key to the healing box, where 2 parts of the new hand will be hidden. However, it will always be necessary to remember the charge of our heart, because once it drops to 0, this hand will simply disappear. Therefore, it is important to always think about it and constantly look for different charging stations to constantly feed energy to our favorite healing hand. Well, of course, 1 healing will be equal to 1 charge, and since our passage was not too easy, I think that the developers will make the maximum number of charges about 4 or maximum 5, and one of the most interesting to me is the fire hand. If you look closely, you will notice that this hand contains a huge amount of small details. It is important to note that the main feature of this hand is that it can shoot fire. Remember the fragment where we paralyze Catnap with an electric charge, and if you think that the effect of our fire hand will be the same, you are very wrong. The whole point of that hand is that we can just scare monsters away or hurt them a little bit, but we cannot kill anyone with that hand. And then there's another reference from Chapter 3. The gun hand has a certain number of charges, and then we have to wait to shoot again. And our fire hand will have the same mechanism, but we won't be able to use it forever because the gas we use is stored in a cylinder that will be attached to our back, and once the gas runs out, our hand will just be useless and we'll probably throw it away. Another very interesting discovery will be the so-called power hand. And again, if you look closely, this hand will have the same feature as the previous one with a reference to reloading as a handgun. However, the power hand will still have the same mechanism, and you can see that the maximum charge is 5. Now let's get more detailed. We will have 5 levels of charge, and if our charge will be at 1, the strike power of the power hand will be no different from the regular hand and maybe even weaker. However, we all know that there are doors in the game that are impossible to open, or vice versa, to raise or lower our normal hand, and in this case power hand will come to our aid. Having accumulated the maximum charge, we can easily knock down this door. Or remember the place with the ducks. For us, they were nothing more than scenery that we couldn't interact with. But if Power Hand had appeared in Chapter 4, it would have been much easier because this powerful hand has the ability to move heavy objects. And of course, Power Hand can also help us a lot when fighting bosses. I do not think it can kill someone big, but it can stun them for a while or knock them back quite realistically. But with bosses as big as Miss Delight, it will be a lot easier because Power Hand will not be able to kill them so much, but it will be able to hurt them very badly. The next hand is no less interesting, the Harpoon hand. This hand itself consists of 2 parts, which we will have to look for in Chapter 4. But believe me, this hand deserves that we tried and found both the hand itself and the harpoon, which will actually be the basis of the action of this hand. What is the main point of this hand? An ordinary hand will be no different from the blue hand and will be the most ordinary part of our body, but once we find the harpoon, it will be much more interesting. Just like the fire hand, the main part of the harpoon will be attached to the back of our main character, and the tip itself will be attached to the hand. And there are only 2 ways to use this arm. Firstly, its main purpose will be faster movement of our character thanks to the ability to attach to the wall and be held in it. Now we won't need special elevators or devices for our arm to fix itself, and we will be able to climb up. It will be enough to shoot from the harpoon hand, and we will be able to reach any point on the map. I agree that this will improve the game a lot, and of course we could theoretically use this hand as a weapon, but except for a small wound, it is unlikely that it can harm our monsters in any way. I will try to rank the monsters we expect to see in the 4th chapter by strength. Let's make a kind of top of the strongest characters in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. I hope you didn't think that I'm going to start my top with the strongest character, revealing all the cards at once. So the 10th place in my ranking of the strongest characters in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 is Hoppy Hopscotch. He is a hare with green fur who is a very active character. In his cardboard from the 3rd chapter, he mentions to us about space, and as we reasoned, we are expecting a space location in the new version of the game. Perhaps it is in this location that we will see Hoppy Hopscotch, and there we will have to fight him. But in my opinion, this character has no special abilities. His only advantage is dexterity, which in the battle with us will not be useful to him. 9th place in my ranking goes to a favorite of my subscribers, Dog Day. Dog Day is a dog from Smiling Critters who has leadership qualities. Let me remind you that Dog Day was chained to a cage at Playcare for not wanting to obey Prototype. But you may ask the reasonable question, why did I place him so low in my rankings? I think that we should expect Dog Day as Prototype's assistant in the new part of the game. He will be like Catnap in the 3rd part of the game. Perhaps he will be given more time in the 4th chapter than in the 3rd. Well, we move on with my ranking, and the 8th place goes to Daisy Flower. Daisy Flower is a character we expected to see back in Chapter 2, but we only saw her as a toy in a warehouse with rejected toys. But I think this character has some pretty good potential. I can even speculate that Daisy Flower has some sort of superpower that will allow her to blend into the game spectacularly. But then you might ask why. If Daisy Flower has such potential, is she only ranked number 8 in the rankings? In my opinion, Daisy Flower probably has a low chance of appearing in the game, and most likely she will remain just our expectation. The 7th place in my ranking of the strongest characters in the 4th chapter goes to Daddy Longlegs. Let me remind you that Daddy Longlegs is a monster from the Longlegs family, but of this family we only met Mommy Longlegs, who was the boss in Poppy Playtime Chapter 2. Daddy Longlegs has excellent anthropometric indicators, which allows him to move quickly and get the enemy at a long distance. Bonus to all this, he is possessed by anger, because he lost his beloved wife, and with a huge probability, he will blame us for her death. So if suddenly such a character appears, we against him will come hard. The next place in my top, namely the 6th, is occupied by Piggy Piggy. This is a cute little piggy that seems to be very friendly at first glance, but as we find out later, it is a bloodthirsty creature that devours everything it sees on its way. Don't believe me? Ask Crafty Corn, Kickin' Chicken, and Bubba Bubba Fant. Since it's been a while since we've seen Piggy Piggy, it's likely that she's insanely bloodthirsty, so as soon as she sees a living creature, she'll immediately pounce on it in order to fulfill her needs. But in my opinion, apart from a huge desire and little physical data, Piggy Piggy has nothing else. I don't think she has any superpowers, but I could be wrong. Moving on, and the 5th place in my ranking is Bobby Bear Hug. You might be surprised because Bobby Bear Hug is a red kind bear who is ready to support her friend at any moment. But I believe that many people have abused her kindness and treated her badly, and because of this, she has a revenge plan for all her abusers. As a bonus to all of this, I believe that Bobby Bear Hug could well have some sort of superpower. For example, she could appear kind when she sees someone offering them a friendly hug, and when someone agreed, she would strangle them in that hug. What superpower do you think Bobby Bear Hug would have? Well, we've come to the 4th place in my ranking, and it goes to Brawn the Dinosaur. Dinosaur Brawn is experiment number 1199. Let me remind you that Dinosaur Brawn is a product of the Bigger Bodies Initiative experiment and was created from a former employee of the Playtime Factory, 59-year-old Thomas Clark. After the experiment, he was put in a cell with other toys that are also the results of these experiments, but for some reason he was taken hostile by them and they mauled him, ripping out his spleen and tearing his vocal cords. After this attack, he had to undergo a long surgery, which he endured, but I believe he harbored a grudge against his abusers and will seek revenge on them. According to my assumptions, Brawn must have grown to a considerable size, and on top of that, he must be very well oriented on the territory of Playcare, because he is an experiment on a former employee who worked here half of his life and knows every corner of this factory very well. Perhaps Brawn has some superpowers, or he may have built himself some tools. We will be able to find out with the release of the game. The 3rd place in the ranking of the strongest characters from Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 is occupied by the evil Kissy Missy. Yes, exactly evil, although Kissy Missy is known to all of you as a kind creature, which together with Poppy Doll is ready to come to our aid. I believe that she has another form, which can cause us a lot of problems. In my opinion, the evil Kissy Missy will be one of the strongest characters in the game, because she has a huge size. She participated in the Hour of Joy and she was experimented on, so she has suffered a lot and is ready for revenge. One of the first manifestations of the evil Kissy Missy we could see when the workers of the Playtime Factory came to the aid of the torn Brawn, and there we can see Kissy Missy running away. What do you think? Will we be able to see the evil Kissy Missy in Chapter 4, and will she be a problem for us? The top 2 in my ranking goes to one of the most anticipated characters, namely Boxy Boo. Boxy Boo is known to us as experiment number 1966. This monster is a streamlined hunter with both speed and agility on his side. Its springy limbs allow it to jump high and far to get wherever it wants to go. Boxy Boo has several ways to surprise his prey. He can shift into the shape of a box and hide among the scenery. His springy arm allows him to grab survivors and pull them closer to him before clawing them to death. Additionally, his music gets louder and faster the closer he gets to his prey. This cute but deadly creature is the horrifying result of several failed experiments. The first of its kind, it was created from its toy counterpart. The original toy was created in 1966 and then used as the basis for this monster. I think we're very likely to see him in Chapter 4, and trust me, he's going to cause us a lot of trouble. And the leader of my rating, as you have probably already guessed, is Prototype. Prototype is a black mechanical prosthesis, which has a human bone at its base, which acts as a joint, and at the end of this prosthesis there are long pointed fingers. Recall that Prototype is first mentioned to us in Poppy Playtime Chapter 1 on a black VHS tape as Experiment 1006 Prototype. Prototype has been described to us as being willing to kill for no reason, as if he enjoys it. It should also be noted that Prototype has a lot of intelligence, as evidenced by the story of one of the scientists on the VHS tape, where he describes how Prototype used something like a laser pointer to interfere with a surveillance camera and escape from the room where he was imprisoned. He also had good organizational skills, because according to our information, he was the one who organized that famous The Hour of Joy, which was fatal for the Playtime Factory. As far as we know, from the words of Mommy Longlegs, Prototype collects remains of dead characters and uses them as elements for his new body. So from here, we can conclude that this prosthesis, which we were shown in both the second and third parts of the game, is only a part of his body, but not the whole body. I believe that Prototype clearly has some sort of plan and is clearly following it. Sometimes it feels like we're playing a game not Poppy Playtime, but Prototype Playtime, because when he needs to, he's even willing to sacrifice his most loyal assistant, the one who killed all the monsters. Even those who simply didn't agree with Prototype. I think you've already realized that we're talking about Catnap. The question arises whether he is really so huge, scary, and strong that he is feared by all monsters, feared even by those who serve him, because they don't know what to expect from someone with such power and intelligence. So I think that Prototype will be a nuisance for us, not only in the 4th chapter, but in the following chapters too. The most mysterious character in Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is the voice from the phone who introduces himself as Ollie. Throughout Poppy Playtime Chapter 3, Ollie helps us in every way possible to find the items we need. We still don't know who he was and why we don't hear him anymore after Catnap's death. So far, this character has not been revealed to us, and all we can know about him is his name. And of course, we heard his voice. Maybe Ollie is a really positive character, but are you sure that we talked to him? Who is Ollie? The release of the 3rd chapter was a month ago, but there are still a lot of theories surrounding this game and its characters, and our Ollie is no exception. And of course, the most attentive and enthusiastic players have already come up with a few theories about Ollie, including that we already know him and that he is the already known enemy Prototype. It would be interesting to see how at the end we meet Ollie in one of the rooms, but suddenly a mechanical arm grows out of his body and we learn that Ollie is actually Prototype. At the beginning of our conversation with him, we learn that he is well acquainted with Poppy herself. Even Poppy herself speaks of him as a positive character and convinces us that he can be trusted. And in practice, this is really true because he helps us, tells us where the objects are, tells us where to go next, who to avoid, and so on. According to Ollie and Poppy, all these monsters need us to stop the most important evil, Prototype. However, we know that all these monsters are guided by very strange thoughts. For example, Poppy herself many times talked about revenge to all the monsters who bullied them. But at the same time, Ollie never said anything about revenge. In fact, it turns out that some monsters use us to fight other monsters. And in this case, we are just pawns in the hands of these monsters, and our main goal is to help these poor monsters and at the same time to save our lives and get out. I didn't see any intrigue within Playtime, and even at the beginning of the 2nd chapter, Poppy wanted to help us get out of this interesting place, but apparently she needs us for something more. Of course, I would like to just send everyone to hell and try to escape myself, but on the other hand, we are already trapped, and to survive and get out of here, we have to follow the instructions of the other monsters. At least that's the tactic we have at the moment. How it all turns out in the end, we will know only in the future. But unlike Poppy, Ollie no longer seems so strange and incomprehensible. At least he doesn't change his mood at the snap of his fingers, and he has some credibility. He always tells us only useful things, and in general, Ollie is a very nice guy, and thanks to him, we at least understand our final goal, to defeat the main villain Prototype. Is Ollie a human or a monster? It's a very interesting question that definitely deserves attention. Ollie himself does not admit who he really is, but we can already make the assumption that he is 99% human. Ollie is the last remaining person, or should I say the last surviving child in the orphanage who found some safe place, and from there he contacts us using a phone that was created for Playtime employees. And I wonder how he knew we were at the orphanage, because at the beginning he told us that he could see that we were confused. But how could he know that about us, and how could he even know that there was anyone in the shelter? Of course, there's a possibility that he's watching us with video cameras, and when I first saw them, I was at a loss. But after a while, I calmed down because I realized that thanks to them we are being watched not by some horrible creature or prototype, but by our goody Ollie. And there are cameras all over the orphanage. But why are we so sure that Ollie is watching us, and what are the arguments in favor of this version? Why can't Ollie be a monster, and how does he know Poppy? I'm pretty sure that Ollie is a doll like Poppy, or any other toy that comes to life. A monster in a word. Either way, we realize he knows this place very well, and you can say monsters can't know the orphanage area perfectly. But you have to realize that they've taken over this place a long time ago, and I'm sure they've studied every square millimeter of this creepy area. It is unlikely that Ollie is a former employee of Playtime, because if it were so, the protagonist would recognize his former colleague and at least introduce himself to him, but we didn't see it. But apparently the protagonist learns about Ollie's existence for the first time in his life. And remember Miss Delight's words where she wonders if we're the only surviving Playtime employee. Which means that Ollie could very well be a monster because we're the only survivors of this horrible place. And that's not just saying that, it's saying that Ollie could very well be a monster. Or Miss Delight just doesn't know there are orphan survivors at the orphanage. Ollie could very well be hiding and showing no signs of existence. But then there's the question of what he was eating and how long he was hiding. And yet there are arguments in favor of the fact that Ollie is not a monster or the result of an experiment, but just an ordinary child who managed to survive after all the horror that happened. Ollie we meet only in Playcare, and if he has been here for a long time, he would have explored this location, and if he was a monster, he would probably have moved on. Based on all of the above, I can't say for sure who Ollie really is, but I'm more inclined to believe that he is a human. Write your opinion about this question in the comments. What if Ollie isn't human, but he's not a monster? What if Ollie is the prototype? Back to the fact that Poppy knows who is hiding under the name Ollie, and we also know that the prototype helped orphans get out of the orphanage with the help of Theodore, who will become Catnap in the future. Also, the prototype can change voices, and he could probably hear someone's voice and memorize it. Also very strange is the fact that after the prototype destroyed Catnap, Ollie stopped contacting us. There are a few oddities in the prototype's behavior. If his ultimate goal was the death of Catnap, why could not it be done in the beginning? If Catnap completely trusts him, and even it is possible to tell that considers it the god, then why it was so long to wait? And why it was necessary to destroy Catnap at all if he is a very strong assistant and thus completely trusted the prototype? And why did the prototype even decide to help us? Even with more and more attempts to reveal the prototype as a character, we still don't know anything about him. I don't understand how that can be. Even in Chapter 3, the prototype is just a giant mechanical arm. His identity or his motives are still mystery number 1 to us in Poppy Playtime. Even the scientists themselves admit that the prototype holds some valuable information. But unfortunately, they don't tell us what they mean. Perhaps they mean its intelligence because the prototype, even when locked up, was able to create a laser pointer to escape. The prototype can manipulate people, and that's a fact. At least Theodore's story gives us a sense of that. Perhaps the prototype was able to manipulate the monsters, and as a result they went berserk, and under all the chaos, the prototype was able to escape. Which means he could have manipulated many others to carry out his plan. But we don't know what it's all about yet. But I'm sure that we are the missing piece of the puzzle that the prototype needed to carry out his plan. And that's why the prototype can help us get further and further away. As we move further into the orphanage, we destroy more and more monsters, which after their death are likely to go to our prototype. But in this case, why he needs us if we can safely say that his power is really amazing and he can cope with absolutely any monster alone. And why, for example, in the second chapter, he did not appear before us and did not tell us everything. Perhaps to carry out his plan, he needs everything to go smoothly and quietly, and he would be like a mere observer who would in no way want all the monsters to die. I think the prototype realizes that he can't do everything quickly and correctly if everyone knows that he's the one responsible for all the horror at Playtime. And that's why he remembered the voice of one of the orphans he helped escape and decided to brazenly steal his voice. And in this case, no one would recognize him, and he would manage to deceive not only the main character, but also the Poppy doll itself, so that there would be no unnecessary questions about whether to trust this strange hand. Of course you shouldn't. And that's why the prototype decided to pretend to be someone to steer the protagonist in the right direction and to mislead Poppy herself while remaining in the shadows. I think it's a very ingenious decision. I think it will continue until the final preparations for the prototype's plan are in place. And what his plan is, I think we'll find out in Chapter 4, or at least I'd like to believe so. And if you look at it from this side, we can safely say that the theory that Ollie is a prototype has the right to exist and would be a very interesting plot twist. And just recently, an amazing leak has appeared on the internet that refers us to Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. The most amazing thing is that we are almost directly told about the release date, and also we see who will be the main character of the new chapter. However, there's still a good chance that this is just a fan work, but let's try to talk to you about the real release date of Chapter 4 and also discuss all the details that may be related to it. The exact release date of the new chapter of Poppy Playtime we certainly don't know yet. However, we can make an assumption, which will be based on the release dates of the previous versions of the game. So let me remind you that Poppy Playtime Chapter 1 was released on October 12, 2021, and almost 6 months later, Mob Entertainment presented the second version of the game. But the gap between Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 and Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is much longer, because the third part was released only on January 30th, 2024, which means the break between the release of the games was almost 2 years. But you can ask a reasonable question, and why such a big break? And now I will try to answer, as you may have noticed. Mob Entertainment has a tendency to increase the size of the chapters, because the second chapter was larger than the first, and the third is much larger than the second. There is an assumption that this trend will continue, and the duration of Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 will be even longer and probably will be about 5 hours. But that's not all. There is one interesting detail, which for some reason is not noted by most fans of the game. This detail is that during the creation of the third chapter, Mob Entertainment Company left a number of developers, which greatly complicated and most likely delayed the release of Poppy Playtime Chapter 3. Well, that brings us to the big question. So when can we expect Chapter 4 to be released? My guess is that we should expect the new chapter by the end of 2025 or even early 2026. But do not be sad, because the new version is likely to be much more interesting than all the previous ones. In my opinion, we will expect a huge number of new locations, also a lot of new interesting riddles that we will have to guess together with you. Yes, of course, perhaps the game will be released earlier, but so far, based on all the information we have and analyzing it, we can only conclude that the game should be expected in late 2025 or early 2026. What do you think? Informative, isn't it? Share your opinion in the comments and also write what else you want to know. I will tell you. That's all for today. Bye-bye, dear friends.